Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to edition 18 of Manure Mondays. We're glad to have you with us again. And today our topic is safe travels, from agitation to application in the field, and lots of aspects around safe travel. So very important topic. And as usual, we ask you to stay muted throughout the session, but don't let that stop you from communicating. We love to have you make comments in the chat, post questions in the chat, and we will look forward to a conversation with our speakers after the presentation. Just a reminder that all the sessions are posted on manuremanager.com. We've been seeing lots of traffic there, folks going and watching previous videos, so encourage you to do that. Check out all of the sessions that are posted there. So once again, today our topic is safe travels. And this is going to be a replay of the recorded session from the North American Manure Expo. But we are thrilled that we do have our speakers live and in person with us here today. So you'll see them, I'll ask them to give us a wave here. This is Walter Gross. And Walter is, today, he could be wearing a number of different hats, but today it is with the Wellington Farm Safety Association. So thanks for joining us, Walter. And we also have Cheryl Skolas, and Cheryl is with the University of Wisconsin. And so both of them are going to be watching the chat if you want to put some comments or questions there, and they will either deal with them on the fly or we'll come back to them at the end. But James, go ahead, cue us up on the video. Let's get started with safe travels.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Skolas from the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension.
I'm Walter Gross, and I'm with Wellington Farm Safety today. I also represent Husky Farm Equipment in my manufacturing position.
Walter and I are here today to talk about safe travels, and as you operate from where you're agitating and out to the field, we realize that there's a lot to transporting those nutrients and till getting them applied. So we're going to talk about some key points of safety and what it takes to get that job done and done well. So today we will be talking about why safety, as well as some pre-travel considerations, including vehicle checks, things to think about as you're out there on the road, and best practices. Then you get to that job site, and we have a few safety messages that we want to talk about and have you put into action at that job site. And then just some final wrap-ups of, don't be hasty using the safety that we're providing today. So why safety is important? As a safety specialist, and I've been working in agricultural safety for over 30 years now, I think, our most important thing is the people that are involved in our agricultural industry. Walter and I, as we were preparing this presentation, we both know individuals and businesses that have been, greatly impacted due to the loss of, an individual or a loss of equipment. So safety is important not only from the personnel side of things, but it's downtime, and when you're under pressure, that only adds to the complications of getting that work done. Accidental spills create other, issues for you and take other agency involvement. Plus, we want to maintain good customer relations, and that public relations has become so important. One of the quotes that I think of comes from Gordon Graham, who is with the fire service training. And if it is predictable, it is preventable. And we really can look at these incidents that we talk about and look at what the causes were. As a safety specialist, to me, there is no such thing as an accident. I'll talk incidents, I'll talk crashes, but there's not that chance of it just happened. And so safety is important for a lot of different reasons.
Yes, Cheryl, we actually did a study in Wellington County, and we found out that most of the accidents, people already knew that there was something wrong with the machinery. They knew that the bearings were bad, or they knew that the lighting wasn't working. And so it is good to check your equipment, but also fix that problem that was preventable.
Good point. as we look at some pre-travel considerations, you know, a good part of safety starts before you actually even get out there to do the work to get it done. You know, maintenance is one of the best safety things that I can recommend to do, because it helps you identify potential issues before you get working for that day or for the time that you're going to be making that trip. So Walter, what are some pre-travel considerations that you have to give to our viewers today?
Well, first of all, I would like to make sure that they understand if they're a farmer or they're a commercial operator. It's very important tax-wise, and also important for the vehicle insurance to make sure that you notify your insurance company that you're doing commercial work. If you're going out to haul manure for money, for profit, then you need to have your insurance policy that covers you for a spill. For the spills bill that we passed here in Ontario, we are responsible for any manure that we spill. And you also need to know, if you're a commercial, that you're going to pay your wages different than you do if you're a farmer. So what that means is a farmer can run longer hours, but a commercial operator, they must pay overtime as soon as they're over 44 hours. So if you're working long weeks, that can cost a lot of extra money. And then if you don't report it, the impact from that is very hard. So I think that's very important. If you know whether you're running an implement of husbandry or a commercial motor vehicle, make sure you get that in line before you ever leave the house.
I think in that area here, we in the US have some regulations related to commercial driver's license, and when you're that farmer and when you're that for hire, and knowing any of those regulations and where you fall if you're on both sides of it as a farmer and that commercial business, that it's really important to have that status known. It also makes a difference when we start talking about some of the vehicles from, you know, registration side of things, where you are and how you are using them. So some of the things that we'll be talking about and things to consider are you operating as that implement of husbandry? And what are the different regulations related to those being those implements of husbandry? And for some of the states here, it may be referenced in your regulations as agricultural machines or agricultural equipment, and not the older implement of husbandry. Here in Wisconsin, we did an update of the rules and have maintained the implement of husbandry, or the IOH. So as you start doing those pre-checks, knowing those rules for those implements of husbandry are going to talk about, you know, what lighting and marking do you need? What weight can you be at? What are special travel considerations with implements of husbandry?
And from Canada's standpoint of view, we haven't changed our rules yet. So our farmers or our commercial operators are following under the same rules. We are talking about a licensing. We are talking about whether we need brakes on the heavier equipment. So all of these examples in this picture are implements of husbandry, and they're items that are determined to be driving under 25 miles an hour or under 40 kilometers an hour for those Canadians. That means that if you have a high-speed tractor, you have to stay at 40 kilometers an hour. You have to be under the 25 mile an hour limit. So that doesn't mean that you're supposed to take off the SMV sign and drive and go faster, because that unit is not designed to go faster. And we've even had people that have been charged for not having the proper tires or the proper wheel bearings to go over 25 mile an hour. So we didn't realize that all those things are very important for the person that's inspecting you when you get stopped at the side of the road.
Yeah, when you get stopped or when that crash happens, and, you know, one of those initial questions is, you know, was this a legal vehicle to be on the road? And all those factors come into play, unfortunately, at that point of time. So know your implements of husbandry. Operator readiness. You know, we know that throughout the season, you're going to be putting in some long days, and one long day is going to lead to the next long day. And we want everybody coming to work ready for the job that day. And, you know, I just have been saying we've been dry here in southern Wisconsin, and I'm hoping for that rainy day because, you know, you just keep going and it's like, it just want a nice rainy day so I don't have to feel like I have that pressure to be out in the yard or down on the farm doing something. But we want to be coming ready for the work that day. If you're not feeling well or you have employees not feeling well or they're dealing with other issues, it takes away from their work that day. And we also can relate to the amount of fatigue. And as we get fatigued, we know that there's a greater chance of taking those risks and some type of an incident happening. Training to me is a really important part, and it's in the regulations that we have training on each of those pieces of machinery. In the OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act here in the States, the requirement is that it's an annual training, but anytime you get a new piece of equipment or something goes wrong or you want to communicate, you know, put that training into your business and also then plan that, you know, you're documenting that business so that you can show that it happened. We talk about a lot of different types of vehicles today. And for each of those types of vehicles that you may be operating out there, look into what license do you need for operating that vehicle. You know, just because it's a farm tractor, in some places, in some situations, it may not fit that definition of being a farm or an agricultural tractor, and you need to look at what is needed for that license. And this gets more complicated as we get talking about what might be a commercial motor vehicle and requiring the CDLs, and once back to that early discussion of what's your business status. We'll talk more about following the rules of the road, but having everybody prepared to know those rules of the road and then actually following them. And, you know, finally, one of those operator readiness is wearing that seatbelt and remembering that if you're the employer of these employees, you need to model those actions. How you set the culture for safety in your business is really important, and everybody coming together with that helps keep. And a basic thing to do is wear that seatbelt so you stay in that safety protection of the vehicle.
Well, when we come in the morning, we want to check our spreaders. We want to check everything and make sure that the equipment is ready. Some people miss that operation checklist. They need to have a piece of paper that they go down through and check things off. You're maybe going to check for a first aid kit, a fire extinguisher. You're maybe going to check if your hitch pin's got a safety clip in the bottom because maybe somebody took it out last night and you weren't aware that they took it out. Is your safety chain still attached? The lighting and the markings. So you need lighting in the day, but you also have to have marking on that manure spreader. You know, are your tires properly inflated? Is your wheel nuts tight? And you have a clean machine and clean windows and clean mirrors. Are you prepared for the day? So let's say that you had one of those amber lights that's out on the back of the spreader and someone drives into the back of your manure spreader first thing in the morning. You just get out to work and someone rear ends your manure spreader. If that light was out and they impound your manure spreader and they checked that the lights were working or not working, if that light isn't working, chances are you might be charged for that accident. So normally if someone rear ends you, they're charged for following too close. But if your spreader isn't properly lit, if it doesn't have an SMV sign, if it's not properly documented, then you're going to be charged for that. And if someone were to die, you may actually be charged with the death of that person because your spreader wasn't properly equipped. So I think that's really important also to write it down on that list, but you need to keep that list. So that list needs to be kept in the office, and we follow our due diligence and we make sure that we have that list, we have it recorded, but then we keep it and we put it in a locked filing cabinet. So if the maintenance, if the ministry comes to inspect your farm or to inspect your place of business, they'll want to make sure that those filing cabinets are locked so that people can't get at your private records.
And why, you know, those records may seem like they're taking you additional time. In the long run, there's a lot of value to them. They're also great to look at your maintenance program overall and be sure that, you know, you're addressing those hazards that could come up. So we're switching over to some of the rules of the road, and they can vary in different places, but we're going to talk about some of those key rules of the road when you're operating and help you generate some ideas of things that you might want to take a look at for whatever areas you're operating in. You know, one of the big rules of the road here is you must yield the right of way to oncoming vehicle and yield half of the roadway. So you need to go to the right of the center line. And even if that's not a marked center line, you still only get half of that road. And on some of our smaller, what we call township roads, you know, they're much more narrower than a state highway. So, you know, what are you going to do? And discussing those routes with your employees or with family members that you have working for you so that you know where are some of those hazardous areas on that route that you're going to be taking, and discuss what to do if you have that oncoming vehicle and you need to get over. So you may not drive left of the side of the roadway on a grade or a curve, and think of where those no passing zones are. You don't want to be, you know, to the left in those areas. You don't know that chance. And I could go in our records and pull up cases where somebody was traveling left of center on a curve and that motorcycle came along and they couldn't get over, you know, fast enough. So be prepared for those hazard areas. Signal your intent to turn. In Wisconsin, it's a requirement that you warn the motorist of turning, and I'm thinking that's probably pretty universal out there. And I've had, you know, people say to me, well, that motorist behind me, they don't care anyhow. They, you know, I have my turn signal on and they don't, you know, pay attention. So why even do it? Well, you have that operator responsibility to warn that motorist. So if you just say, I'm not going to bother because they're not going to pay attention, you know, it comes back to that, you know, accident crash investigation. You didn't warn me. They didn't see that turn signal. I just brought our little Kubota tractor up from the farm last week, and, you know, I had on my turn signal, and it's a no passing zone the whole way from the farm to where I'm turning left. And so I signaled my intent. I turned on that flasher. I put out, it's small, so I could put out my arm for a left-hand turn. And I no more than got, you know, across the road, and here came the dump truck buzzing by me. So I'm glad that I took that time to signal. Are there things about this set of rules of the road, Walter, for people to consider out there?
Well, everything's the same as you mentioned in Canada. We can't get over the yellow line at all. And so we have to make sure. And we do have wider shoulders, and I'll show you a picture of that later on.
Okay. So one of the things that you can discuss, and this varies in different areas, I know, is, you know, we may not drive slow enough to impede the normal movement of traffic. So I know in Iowa, there had been the rule that they couldn't have more than 5 vehicles behind them until they needed to find a safe place to pull over. So at what point, and is it practical for you to get off that roadway? Well, we have some roads here that would have that shoulder that could handle the size and the weight of the equipment that you're dealing with. So it may not be practical to get over. So there leaves you a little bit of flexibility, but think about some of those areas, and do you need to be traveling during those busier times? What could you do if you got that string of cars behind you? The Wisconsin situation that we had was we had a rule that allows for passing in a no passing zone, which still doesn't make a lot of sense to me, why we would pass in something deemed a no passing zone. But it became an issue for a lot of our farmers and those operating implements of husbandry. So here we have it that you can't pass in that no passing zone. People are still doing it, but at least when something happens, it gives our, you know, agricultural operators of those implements of husbandry, you know, an area on the road where those vehicles, other vehicles shouldn't be passing them. Lighting and marking. We probably could be doing this whole session on lighting and marking standards, Walter, don't you think?
Yeah, I would agree.
And so, you know, look at, once again, whose road you're operating on, being the various states, what's the requirement. That SMV emblem is pretty universal out there on agricultural equipment. It's a long time symbol that marking that has been used. You know, really encourage you to check out your SMV emblems. to be sure that you have a newer SMV emblem so that that red stripes on the outside has the retroreflective material in it. Looks like little prisms. And that, because that changes the visibility of that SMV sign from 500 feet to like 1,200 feet. It really makes a difference in those hours of darkness of picking up the light on those cars. So look for and check out those SMV emblems. You know, those are an easy piece to replace. And so as you do that check, you know, of lights and things, look at your marking elements and see, you know, that material is still showing that color, is still fresh, and that a vehicle coming up behind you is going to have full benefit of those lighting and marking requirements.
But you'd be happy to know, Cheryl, that our Farm Safety Association trades in your old sign and we'll give you a brand new sign. Free of charge.
That is a great policy, great action. So different lighting and marking standards that are going to be in different states here, but you know, look at where those amber reflectors are required. I think on the manure tankers and the equipment that I've worked with through the years, you know, one of the things is giving that visibility to that driver to know those size dimensions of your pieces of equipment, and meaning height, width as you're going down the road. So if they do have to make that decision, or they're trying to make that decision of, we want to be able to pass around you, can they fully see, you know, where that size of that equipment is, and taking, you know, advantage of some of the newer lighting technology to make your vehicle more visible. You know, we think a lot about the hours of darkness and that, you know, the lights for that time, but a lot of crashes happen during daylight hours. And so using those newer technologies to have better lighting and marking is to your advantage, even outside those hours of darkness.
We have been adding a lot of strobe lights and a lot of extra lights. Sometimes our local traffic people, they would say, well, that's way too many lights, because then they can never tell if you're turning left or you're turning right because all the flashers are going. But at least you're being noticed because you have those extra strobe lights.
Yeah, the strobe lights have been very valuable out there. Agricultural trains can have different lighting and marking requirements. So, you know, during the hours of darkness, we're here in Wisconsin looking at each side of the vehicle in the train, having the reflectors, the amber lights, that SMV symbol or emblem. One of the things with those SMV emblems is you want to be sure that whatever that last part of your agricultural train is, has that SMV emblem visible. You can have more than one SMV emblem visible, but you want to be sure that whatever comes at the end has that SMV and the markings on it. One of the things here is that this is the maximum. The tractor and two-toed implements would be the maximum length for an agricultural train here. So we can't go longer than that tractor and two-toed units for our agricultural trains.
Well, I'm not sure that's quite the same in Canada, because I've seen a lot longer than that.
We see them here every now and then too, and that's an easy one when I work with law enforcement to say, you know, 3 is max, and they can remember those numbers.
Well, and when we're talking about, you know, the SMV sign, we are allowed here in Canada to hook on with a pickup truck and tow a gravity wagon to the field. But once you hook on that pickup truck, it still must stay under 25 mile an hour or under 40 kilometers an hour. So that pickup truck then becomes a tractor, because you're now towing an implement of husbandry. So you have to follow those rules. And we don't have as many limits for length and width and size or weight. But I think there's a lot of responsibility in making sure that it's not too big.
There is, and you know, look, again, this can be state and area specific. So knowing what those vehicle dimensions and those weight limits are. Wisconsin did a road study back from October of 2012 through 2015 and updated after 50 some years. And as we looked at vehicle dimensions and weights, you know, we have a lot of different requirements that a lot of other places might have. But just because there's not, you know, a width restriction on vehicles for agricultural vehicles, you know, that doesn't mean that those IOHs, you know, don't have to apply those rules of the road here. So know those dimensions. There's going to be parts of your roads and your routes that are going to be limiting factors. So I use the bridge picture here because, you know, a lot of times if it's a posted bridge, that posted bridge weight limit, you know, it still applies. So you might think I'm only crossing this, you know, a few times, I can go over it heavy. But you also have to remember that if you damage it, you pay for it. And in Wisconsin now, the damages can be assessed to 3 times the cost of repairing. And repairing getting a new bridge can be pretty costly. So know those vehicle dimensions and weights. We also had a case too where a town built a new bridge and implement dealer was hauling equipment, and they caught that piece of equipment under that, you know, as they were passing under the bridge. And what they discovered was that, you know, the town had lowered the height of the bridge to be able to have a little cost savings. And so the route was still on a US highway. So the implement dealer, you know, set things up based on the US highway that they were, or the state highway they were operating on. And then they got caught on that lower bridge design. So knowing those types of vehicle dimensions and weights gets really important. It also applies when we come to, you know, use that equipment to be in control of the load. And so when you think about, you know, operating some of these loads without brakes, how are you going to maintain that control? So looking at weights and knowing that you're going to be able to safely operate those control. And Walter, you're designing this equipment, you're building it. So this is probably some factors that you look at all the time in what capacities towed loads are going to be able to handle.
Yes, and in Canada, we're actually looking at making a rule that brakes would be standard on equipment over a certain weight. And we would meet these requirements, obviously the 1.5 or keep it under the 4.5. So, you know, an example of how to add up the weight of the tractor and then multiply or divide it, sorry, by the weight of the equipment. And then that's where you're going to get your factor. And I think when you push the limit too much, then the brakes inside the tractor start to fail. And if you've lost the brakes in the tractor, you have no safety device at all. And so we provide air brakes, we provide mechanical brakes, as well as what the tractor provides. So
it's a really important safety factor that needs to be considered.
Well, this is an example of somebody trying to unload a tractor trailer at the side of the road, or in Wisconsin and Canada now, we're using a lot of frac tanks. And so this would be an example of how you would unload into a frac tank. So in Canada, we would actually have to have flag people, and we would have to have more pylons set up. We would have to have men at work signs placed 500 feet back before that truck, because that truck is taking up a lane of traffic. And so we have to have actually 2 flag people, 1 on each side, to make sure that we can warn oncoming traffic of when to pull over. So you need to have a clear view over top of the hill to make sure. So don't unload right down in the valley of a hill, especially if the traffic's going to be coming over. Can you change your route? Can you come around the block? Can you make sure that all your manure spreaders go in the same direction? And then that way you don't have 2 manure spreaders trying to pass. And you may have to get permission from the township to make sure that you can travel on that road. We talked earlier about rush hour traffic or early in the sunrise in the morning. Could you set your timing a little differently so that you don't have to worry about rush hour traffic on that road? And then make sure that you start transferring manure a little later. And there may be a time at which you just have to stop working for at least a half an hour until somebody gets out of the way.
And, you know, talking to those road authorities about those areas that you're looking to be offloading in is a really valuable thing, so that they can help you identify some of those areas of concern on those roads and routes. Some of our, you know, townships and counties also have the requirements to get permits for working and using the right of way that you may have to follow. So planning the route takes some extra time and requires some communications, but a very valuable thing to do. So we were talking about, you know, as you were operating on the road and in this, you know, recorded style today, it's hard, it'd be great one to have a question, but stop a minute and think about when you're operating on the road, what is your greatest concern? It's probably going to be accidents or crashes, those things we can't control. So we need to look at what can we control.
So 4 factors that we could be dealing with here is distracted driving. And that's our new buzzword now. High-speed tractors, impaired driving or careless driving, and not wearing your seatbelt, not paying attention to what you're doing, and then losing control of the tractor. So we've now had to change the impaired driving to whether you have drugs or alcohol, whether you're under the influence. So maybe when you went to a party last night and the party went till 1 or 2 o'clock, and then your boss wants you to be at work at 6 o'clock hauling manure, are you still under the effects of alcohol? And you cannot go to work. If you know that you're still under the influence of alcohol, you cannot go to work, because not only are you responsible for your action, but now that you're working for somebody, your boss is responsible for your actions. And so the fine is going to go to you, the fine's going to go to the company, and that equipment will get impounded. If you're in Canada, we actually impound the equipment and take it away. If you're harvesting wheat, that's a real problem when you lose your combine. So how many times a day are you using your cell phone, right? If the Bluetooth headset, like I'm wearing today, it only costs a few minutes. You have the earpiece that you put in. Those are a few dollars at the store. But if you're trying to use your cell phone and driving, you're not paying attention to what you're doing. If your tractor is twice as big as a car, you're twice as long, you're twice as wide. So does that mean you have 6 times the chances to hurt somebody or kill somebody?
Yep, and those crashes are one of those things we don't want to have happen. So let's look at a couple of causes of those. The left-hand turn, look at those routes, you know, where those left-hand turns and possible collisions can be. It's a common type of crash that happens out there. So talk about some of those factors and where you might need to be extra cautious. Rear end collisions, we're seeing this more as we get, you know, greater speed differences between our farm equipment and our motor vehicles. And especially, like, I have an area where people come off the interstate and they're going, you know, 70 is the posted speed limit, and they get off onto that town road and want to go faster. Check your rear. We've talked about lighting and marking, but look at, you know, from that rear, is that vehicle going to be visible? You can see the one on the left-hand side needs to be a little bit of cleaning up and making those SMV and lights a little bit brighter.
So this combine actually needs an SMV, and nobody ever puts an SMV sign on the end of their header. But once you hook the header wagon onto this combine, you can never see the SMV sign up on the machine. So also notice how wide the shoulders are in Canada. We have an extra gravel strip on most of our roads, and then we have a grass ditch on the side. So that's why it's a little more comfortable to drive farm equipment in Canada.
So the other factor that we want to really consider is those machine-related rollovers, you know, and we've talked about this a little bit earlier with the discussion about pulling that too large of a load. Easy to lose that control, but we also want to recognize that these manure tankers as an implement are also a confined space. So when we come to that machine related rollover, again, it's, you know, is it at the appropriate load for what's towing the load? So just some things that you can do and cover to help prevent these crashes. And as you work through this, things to remind, you know, yourself or others that are working for you or with you about what you can do to help prevent these crashes.
So we often comment that a new driver, maybe 16 years old, and he's never driven heavy equipment before, and you put him in the tractor for the very first day. So I think we need to have some more training, some more understanding that people train their employees to make sure that they understand if you're going downhill, well, that spreader push you downhill and make your tractor jackknife. Or if you're going uphill, do you have enough traction or properly geared to go uphill so you can make it to the top? All of those things are important to teach a new driver, because not everybody gets to drive tractor. Like we did in the early days, everybody drove a tractor. Well, now there's people coming to drive equipment that have never driven tractor before. So you maybe have people cut you off or pull around, and that's why you need to use your mirrors to find out if somebody's coming around you to make room for where you're going. So lots of things could have gone wrong in this situation. So cleaning up a spill, once a spill happens, in Ontario, we need to have a contingency plan for this. We need to have a vacuum manure spreader on call. We need to have the number of people that we can call. We need to have the fire department available, because if we have a spill like this, we need to contain this spill as quickly as possible. And when I said you can call people on your cell phone, you know that there'll be a lot of people taking pictures with their cell phone. And that's what's going to happen in an accident like this. People are going to want to snap a picture of it and send it to their friend and post it on social media. So as an owner of a company, you need to discuss with your employees, what's the cell phone use? What's the policy? Are you taking pictures and posting them? If you have a spill, is that something that you can post on the internet, or is that something that you don't post at all and keep it to yourself? So if you notice at this accident, they've got vacuum trucks, they've got water trucks, they've got the fire department, they've got the ditch blocked off so that they make sure that the manure doesn't run down the ditch. So they're following protocol, but it takes a lot of people to make this happen.
So public image is very important, and Walter just brought up some great points about, you know, the social media time that we're in. And so whenever you're out there on those roads, it's a time to work on your public image. I just want to touch on one of the points, that third bullet of keeping the roads clean, using the sweepers and scrapers. Not only is that a best practice, here it's a law that you can't spill anything on the road without cleaning it up. So be sure that you meet that legal requirement to clean it up. How clean is good enough is a common question that I get, but can you tell the difference that you went out there and cleaned it up? It's not something to leave to Mother Nature, that the next time it rains, it's going to be washed off. So we want to be happy, have happy neighbors when we're out there working in these different areas. Just reinforcing that you are in the public eye. This was a recent case down in Florida where a dump truck lost its load of manure. There was all kinds of fun, different headlines related to the poop being on the road, and an area having that interstate closed really impacted a lot of people's time that day, and not some good public relations.
So now we move on to the job site. So now you're at the manure pit, you're at the farm. And so if you come to this facility and you open a gate, you better make sure that you close the gate when you're done the job, because that's your responsibility. You need to leave the farm. So if you forgot to close the gate and you left, and then some child runs around and falls in the manure pit, and then now it's going to be empty. So that's very dangerous, and we need to make sure that those things are kept track of.
We have been talking about, you know, the pre-travel considerations, some things on the road, but now we're going to get to that job site, and you're going to have a lot of different, you know, activities going on at one time. I want you to consider that every job site is going to be different, and if you've been in this industry, you know that. You don't need me telling it, but just reinforcing the fact that, you know, take some time and pre-assess for the hazards that your employees need to be aware of at these different job sites. There's a lot of different designs out there in job sites, and what are some of the hazards and the risk. I look at this one, and not only is it liquid manure storage, I see the crust, I think manure gases, I think, you know, slips and falls, I think about mechanical equipment, all those things that you could have notes and reference for these different areas.
So if you're going to take notes, make sure you write them down and keep them. That's part of our due diligence, is always to record that information. And when we speak about a manure pit like that, you notice that it's fenced in. So when you come to the site, you open the gate and you put your equipment in and do the job. You should make sure that there's a gate every night that's around your equipment in case the children are playing at night, but you also should make sure that when you leave, the gate is closed, because if you forget to close the gate and someone's injured, you're liable, because that's your job to leave the farm the way you found it.
So unfortunately, in recent years, we have talked more and more about the manure gases. We have a much greater awareness of manure gases. And one time we typically looked at these in confined spaces, such as we mentioned the tanker being a confined space. But back in 2016, unfortunately, we had a fatality here in Wisconsin that occurred along that open air manure storage. And it also that year, we had a number of incidents related to the deep pits being designed into beef cattle operations. So, you know, look at those spaces that you're working in, and being aware of hydrogen sulfide is our one gas that we really talk about, because it is that toxic gas and very dangerous. In a quick amount of time, it becomes very dangerous. So Walter,
Well,
I think
that's what I've found, is that hydrogen sulfide, it reacts so quickly. You don't have much chance to get to the early stages. And people say, well, if I have a headache and then I feel nausea and then I passed out, I was unconscious. Or most of the time you take one breath and you die. So you inhale, but you don't exhale. And that's how quick hydrogen sulfide works. So we don't have a chance to figure out that we're in a dangerous situation because it comes so quickly. So this yellow device in front of you is called a monitor, a hydrogen sulfide monitor. So it is set for 15 parts per million of hydrogen sulfide. The workman's compensation rules say that if you have a 25 part per million, then you have to send your employee home for an 8-hour shift. So if you're agitating by a lagoon and he starts to get a headache, that's 100 parts per million. So definitely at 25 parts per million, one of your employees has to go home for 8 hours of clean, fresh air. One time we were filling a manure spreader and we checked with the monitor right up by near the hole. We had 151 parts per million. That's enough to cause dizziness, nausea, and even unconsciousness. And we've had that where someone went to look in a hole to find out how full the manure spreader was and then fell unconscious off the top of the tank. We found in the more recent years that if you're bedding with drywall or gypsum, that there's more of a reaction, more of a built-up gas. And Cheryl and I were talking about that earlier.
yeah, so anything that you could have some added sulfur, be it areas that have a higher concentration of sulfur in the water, the gypsum, you know, some of the ethanol byproducts that might be getting fed to animals, those things that can increase that amount of available, you know, sulfur for that hydrogen sulfide to be created is important to consider when you're looking at those risks. And, you know, this single gas monitor that's in the picture here, you know, you can buy them now that they'll last for 3 years. And, you know, about $250 for the 3-year ones. You know, that's a realistic type of a safety device to be using. I would also mention that beyond just where we think of the confined space along that agitator, we had one business that had an employee that was out in the field operating and lost vision as he was driving in the tractor cab. And so when you think about that slurry being applied in the field, it can still come off and come into some of those other spaces. So the gas monitors are one way to know what you're working in.
So we mentioned before that manure spreader was a confined space. So if you're going to enter a manure spreader, you're running a commercial operation. So that means that you have paid employees. And if one of them is asked to go inside a manure spreader, this is the kind of equipment that they're going to have to wear. So you need to be trained in order to wear that harness and enter the manure spreader. In order to wear the Scott Air Pack, you need to be trained. So I often tell farmers, if they're going to do something dangerous on the farm, tell their wife, have a buddy system. have a system installed so that you know that you're going to be safe.
And you know, your life is as valuable to you and your family as everybody, you know, that employee. So don't take the extra risk just because I'm the owner and I think I can do this.
So when we have to get to the field, a lot of the time now we're using an ATV or a UTV to get to the field. So we don't have them properly licensed. So I'm going to explain the best way to make sure that your ATV is licensed. It's insured under your automobile policy because that's the way that you're going to get the accident benefits. Don't have any riders on it. Make sure you wear your helmet. And then make sure if you're on the road, you're at a reduced speed. Remember, you're not going the full speed limit, you're at a reduced speed. And then that way you can make sure that you're at least safe and you don't injure a worker.
And I would think here, you know, we have the requirement that you're showing that it's agricultural work that you're doing. If you're operating as an agricultural vehicle is another factor.
So I'd just like to explain a little bit about Ontario. We have a project called the Emily Project, and that was because Emily was injured or hurt in the field and not the emergency services weren't able to get to her. So they have designed a system where you can get a number on every one of those rural properties. And if you have an emergency number on that rural property, get that thing programmed into the employee's phone so that you can say what field they're going to. So it's not Jim's back 40 or the front field down at James Place. Let's get a number on that field. Let's get it programmed into the phone so that when we have an emergency, the helicopters can find you, the emergency services can find you, and they know where to go. And create a safety plan for your business, create a fire safety plan and post it at the end of the road so the fire department knows how to get to you.
So to wrap up here, you know, this is a slogan that Walter had and they're using up there in Canada. Don't be hasty, use safety. And I think that's a great one. A lot of times it's we got to get her done. We're going to go and we're going to go hard. But sometimes that shortcuts safety. So are you ready to do your job? Be prepared for the day. Do you know those rules of the road that you're operating on? Is your equipment going to be well maintained? Proper lighting and marking, we've talked a lot about. Be aware at all times of your surrounding. Who might be there? Is there kids on the farm? You know, look twice for the other guy. Think of the telephone company practice to walk around and check before you get in and get moving. Be that courteous driver. We can have a lot of uncourteous drivers out there, but put that best face forward and be professional and be the courteous driver. Know your vehicles, know your size limitations, your dimensions, what's going to be that required braking, do those things for crash avoidance. Keep your equipment clean, 1 for the maintenance of it, 2 for the visibility, 3 for that public image. Get sleep, don't be fatigued. You know, that fatigue factor kicks in. Sleep well, eat well, take care of yourself. Avoid that excessive caffeine. There's some days it seems like excessive caffeine is a good thing to this Norwegian, but there is a limit on caffeine. And some of those buzz drinks that are out there are dangerous too. No drugs and alcohol. You're in a workplace, follow those practices and procedures for everyone. No extra riders, and there might be that buddy seat in that vehicle and you're thinking I'm just taking somebody along, but at the same time, it's an extra person taking your attention away. Something can go wrong. We've had doors open. We've had people fall out of equipment. Even if they're younger kids, it's just not worth the risk. Have that emergency number, know what to do and train on what to do in an emergency. Train with your rescue squad so that they can also learn about your equipment and help keep that emergency preparedness ready in your neighborhood. Set the example, don't be the example. You know, your good practices are going to help keep everybody going, make for those happy neighbors. Don't be, you know, that poop truck on the Florida interstate that people are talking about, and have a good and safe year as we finish up here, going from, you know, your workplace down the road to those job sites and getting back home safely at the end of the day.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Cheryl. And for everybody else, thank you for listening. And we'll meet you again next time.
Thanks, Walter.
You're on mute, Andrew.
Oh, double click. Thanks a lot, Walter and Cheryl. What an excellent presentation. You've covered so many things. We've got a few minutes here for questions, so let's go ahead and chat. And I do want to draw attention again. Cheryl had put in the chat asking folks to make some comments on. Well, the last one was any recommendations you may have in terms of employee training for tractor and machinery operations during travel. That's a huge one. So feel free to put comments in the chat to that. But I just want to go through a few things here. I like that quote near the beginning Cheryl used, if it's predictable, it's preventable. Now, both of you have been at this a long time. Cheryl, any more quick comments on that? If it's predictable, it's preventable.
Now, I just think we know a lot about the risk and the hazards, and taking some time to review those with everybody, we can remove a lot of those hazards and address them. So it's just kind of a good thing to think about. Of we don't have to let these things happen. There's enough stuff that's going to happen anyhow. My family's home farm was hit by a tornado on Saturday night. And so, my cousins are in the process of cleaning up from that. And you just look at a natural disaster impacting your farm. So let's prevent those predictable things.
Yeah, Walter, how much of this is human nature? I think about even the fact, I know myself over the years, even you get a warning light pops up on the tractor or in whatever vehicle you're driving, and you think, oh, I'll have to do something about that later. And then the warning light goes from just, flashing to, or from being on to flashing, and then, okay, maybe I better pay attention. And sometimes we let those go, but some of this seems to be human nature.
It definitely is human nature. We're just, sorry about that. What we do is we have human nature because when we get to a farm, we're busy in the farm season and we're hurrying and we take shortcuts to try and get there faster. And that's why I don't consider that there are too many farm accidents, because most of them are preventable.
Mm. Yeah. So one of the things you talked about was the circle check, okay, which, following up on this is something we can put into place to help overcome that human nature, which is to ignore it. But either of you to comment on a circle check, how long does that actually take? You spell it out for each piece of equipment. How do you make it become a regular part of the routine, that sort of thing?
So for what we've done here is we created checklists. So for all of our tractors and for all of our forklifts, we've created a checklist, and I've shared that with quite a few farmers in the area. And what that's doing is allows them a checklist every morning to check the tractors and to check the equipment to make sure that nothing happened to it overnight. Like, you don't know if somebody borrowed that tractor last night and did something dangerous to it. So at least if you have a checklist early in the morning, it's ready to go when you start first thing in the morning.
And I just helped with our Manure Hauler 101 last week here in a couple locations in Wisconsin. And I am the checklist, supporter. And there's a number of them out there and if you're having a hard time coming up with what should be on it, drop an email and we'll help connect you to those. And the other reason for having those checklists is it's also great documentation that, something needs to be fixed by somebody. And as you're going around it, are there some added things that, can build into your maintenance program? And it helps people, look more specifically for those preventable factors.
Absolutely. And training employees, what a key thing there. I have to admit, I had a lot of stories come to my mind as you were going through your presentation. I'm a farm kid, and I actually remember one I'll tell is my first job off the farm. Dad would always say, go get some different experience, work for another farmer. And so I worked for a neighboring farmer, 13 years old. And day one on the job, my job was to pull 2 full hay wagons down the highway and go over a bridge over the 401, which is kind of like I-75, and then turn left halfway down the other side of the bridge. And I'd driven the tractor a lot, but I wasn't used to a tractor with no brakes and no lights and pulling 2 full hay wagons. And so I remember going up the hill on the bridge and thinking, there's 2 ways this can go. One is I get over the other side, I can see nothing and I have no idea, or else I drive right up the middle of the highway and say, today, this is my road. And that's the only way I could do it safely. And that's what I did. But, zero training. And I'd like to think things have improved. Have they improved? Are we doing a better job of training people today? Cheryl, what do you think?
Well, I think it's important that we stay helping our rural communities support getting youth those training programs, such as the tractor and machinery certification program that's required to work for somebody here. It's one of those that, in a lot of places, one of the factors is, that generation prior doesn't know how to drive tractors. So we need those who know how to drive tractors, can help provide that instruction to support keeping those programs or getting those programs in place so that, that our youth of today can get that instruction from somebody and give them some chances at experiences before they get into that job for the neighbor or even for their own families.
And Walter, we were talking before we started here today. You were telling me about some sessions you have coming up with young people. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of the things that you're doing in that regard?
So definitely a checklist for training, like even with the young kids, we're trying to have a sign-off list so that if they've been taught how to run a grinder or how to run a saw or how to run a tractor, that they have a sign-off list that they can actually say, yes, I've been instructed how to run that tractor. And that includes the implements, right? How to hook up, how to back up. We tell a lot of the kids at Farm Safety Days, we talk about never get close to a tractor because the operator inside cannot see you. And so if your dad's running a tractor, don't run in behind the tractor to try and see your dad because he can't see you from up in that tractor. And we also talk about places that are safe to play or safe to be on the farm and where you shouldn't be. And definitely you shouldn't be in a pen with an animal. So we talk about that and teach these children. So when you have 200 kids at a Farm Safety Day, it's very exciting to see their expression on their face and how many times the kids say, oh, I remember when Billy did that. And then you find the really true stories then.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just about out of time here, but you did also talk about the public image. And I guess I just like to emphasize that again. I think that the roadways in particular is a place where there's an intersection between the public and farmers. And it is a real, an important place where, the image that is portrayed, the example that is set, and whatever is left behind sure says something into the minds of the general public. Cheryl, any final comments on that?
I think we all, want to do our best at that public image. And sometimes we get frustrated with the other driver, but just being that professional when you're out there and in your local communities, helping people understand the size of your equipment, why you need to be on the road, always putting it, into a positive opportunity when you're interacting with them.
Yeah. Walter, any final comments? We got to wrap it up here, but any final comments you want to say?
Well, definitely wash off your slow moving vehicle sign so people can see it. That's the first thing we got to do. And if you live in Ontario, come on over here and our Farm Safety Day, we'll trade you in your old SMV sign for a brand new one.
And that is a perfect way to wrap it up. Cheryl and Walter, thank you very much to both of you. Appreciate your time, appreciate your expertise, and appreciate what you're doing. It is important work, and I just encourage you to continue on in it. And so folks, just before I put up the QR code, just want a reminder for you for next week that our topic is manure additives, and specifically looking at additives to reduce pH in storages and during application, and basically to reduce ammonia and methane losses. So it's going to be a very interesting topic. Two speakers. We have Andreas Gerwin from Vogelsang in Germany and Andrew van der Zag from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Ottawa. So that looks to be another excellent topic. So we look forward to having you there for next week. And in the meantime, I will post the QR code here. And so if you are a certified crop advisor, you can click on that for your credit. But otherwise, thank you for joining us, and everybody have a great week. We'll see you back here, same time, same place next week. Cheers.